So we know it's pretty much impossible to influence your sexual orientation once you're an adult, so you can't make yourself gay or vice versa. But what if you wanted to make your son gay? Along the course of this video, I'm gonna be analyzing the factors that are linked to homosexuality in men to create a guide on how to increase the likelihood of your future son ending up gay. Also, I made this video just for the sake of research and curiosity, so if that's what you're thinking, no, this video is not loaded with some backhanded sarcastic far-right nor far-left political message. I hate politics. Having that out of the way, let's start with the tutorial. If we look at the literature, there's a pretty clear genetic factor surrounding homosexuality. Essentially, there's two main sources of evidence pointing towards this: twin studies and molecular genetic marker studies. The first type of evidence, or twin studies, consists of looking at pairs of twins and examining the likelihood of said pairs to have the same sexual orientation. Now, having a gay fraternal twin increases the chances of you being gay, and having a gay identical twin increases them even more. This generally is a very strong suggestion for a genetic causation of homosexuality. Usually, these studies kind of agree that genetics account for around a third of the variance in sexual orientation across populations. However, the genetic architecture is complex, involving many genes with small effects, and even genetics themselves interact with environmental factors during development. Also, gay people are very rare. They make around a 2 to 4% of the population. The same way twins are also very rare. Matter of fact, they are around exactly as rare as gay men. This means that gay twins are incredibly rare, meaning these studies aren't very abundant and are subject to various forms of selection bias and systemic ascertainment of the subjects to be studied. So what is the other type of evidence? Molecular genetic marker studies consists of looking into large genome databases to find correlations between genetic markers and certain traits. Again, getting a completely random sample of genomes that you know for sure belong to heterosexual and homosexual people is a bit hard. On top of that, genes are very complex and their interactions with one another and the environment is very hard to explain. This is why, ever since the year 1993 with the original Dean Hamer studies, nobody has really agreed upon an exact gay gene or specific gene loci that seem to determine sexual orientation across studies. It's more like a very complicated interaction between genes themselves and the environment. Also, there are a couple papers out there examining the sexual orientation of the offspring of gay and lesbian people. Now, there's a couple of different ways lesbian and gay people can have kids, but most of the time, their kids turn out to be heterosexual, with a slightly increased likelihood of coming out lesbian or gay too, like their parents. This, however, is not the case for kids who are adopted by lesbian or gay people. It only applies to their biological children. So what can we take from this? If you want to have a gay son, you're gonna want to make sure it runs your genes. So having homosexual relatives both on the father and the mother side is gonna increase the likelihood of your kid being gay. Matter of fact, you're gonna want both yourself and the other biological parent to be gay. Good luck getting yourself and another lesbian or gay person to have the kid together, but if you don't manage, don't even bother with getting someone else who's also homosexual to raise the kid with, since that's probably not gonna affect the kid's sexual orientation. If you want your son to be gay, you also want to make sure you have a lot of male offspring before you have your gay son. There's a very good bulk of evidence out there demonstrating how gay men tend to have a lot of older brothers. This is a very consistent finding that still pops out even when you control for many other variables. It is not related to parental age, nor other kinds of siblings like younger brothers, sisters, or half-siblings on the father's side. They even did a study that compared men with biological older brothers to men with half or step older brothers, and found that only biological brothers on the mother's side predicted men's sexual orientation, regardless of the amount of time reared with these siblings. So basically, the more biological older brothers you have, the more likely you are to be gay. We don't really understand how this works, but there seems to be some mechanism going on inside the mother's womb where each male child given birth to makes it more likely the next one comes out gay. This effect builds up with every subsequent male kid had by the same mother. So, if you want your son to be gay, maybe try making some other boys first. So how can you make sure you have the most amount of male kids? You can't. I mean, I really looked into the environmental and biological factors influencing human sex ratios at birth, and there's research on the mother's age, mother's nutrition, sex positions, and stress induced by catastrophes and war, but no consistent strong predictive patterns across the literature. So you're just gonna have to roll the dice here. So we don't want our kid just to be gay, we want him to look and sound gay. But first, what is a gay voice? Believe it or not, there actually is some research out there studying the gay voice. Basically, it consists of a higher variation between low and high frequencies in speech, and dragging out of the vowels and certain consonants, and sometimes a lisp. And no, it is not related to mean frequency, i.e., it's not related to having a high or low-pitched voice, but it is related to, however, sounding more feminine. Now, I'm gonna be dead ass with y'all, I have a non-existent gaydar. Along the course of my 20-year-old adult life, I've met a total of 4 gay men in person, and every single time, I couldn't tell they were gay until they straight up said so. So I don't think this gay voice thing really applies to the majority of gay men. Matter of fact, the percentage of accuracy with which people can tell if a speaker is gay or not is usually pretty high, and in some studies oscillates around 50 to 70%, which in my opinion is quite high. However, this is in studies where the sample is not very accurate. For example, half of the sample is gay and the other half isn't, which we know isn't realistic. Now, there are studies out there that analyze gay men's voices and speech patterns depending on who they're talking to. It seems to be that gay men have a higher chance to express a gay voice when they've already come out, when they talk to someone they think is gay, or when they talk to people they feel more comfortable with. There's even a study out there examining how a YouTuber's speech characteristics change after coming out as gay to his audience. So if you want your already gay son to, well, sound gay, this may seem obvious, but make sure he comes out as gay and that he feels comfortable as such. However, the gay voice thing really does not apply to all gay people.
We have decided to read some thirst comments gathered from around,
let alone a majority, and it might change between cultures, languages, and individuals. So your kid might very well be gay, but not have any sort of stereotypical gay voice. So what are you supposed not to do? We know a few things that are definitely related to causing homosexuality, but we actually know many more that are certainly not causing it. Back in the day, for instance, between the 1960s and 2000s, some doctors would take male subjects that had lost their genitalia due to accidents or malformations and surgically and socially reassign them as girls because they believed this would make them happier. Now, this obviously is no longer a medical practice in the current day, but they did manage to make some studies that follow these reassigned boys into adulthood and track their sexual orientation. Now, there's only 7 subjects that were properly tracked across the literature that are cited in Bailey 2016, but spoiler alert, all of these males reassigned into females ended up being attracted to women in their adulthood, even though one of them even identified as a female after. So this may sound obvious, but if you want your son to be attracted to men, mutilating or modifying his body is probably not going to help, nor is socially reassigning him as a girl. So remember when I said the more older brothers a kid has, the more likely he is to come out gay? Again, they control for non-biological siblings, sisters, stepbrothers, and a bunch of other things, and none of that made a difference. So maybe don't try to go full loud house on your kid and raise him with a bunch of stepsisters in the hopes that he turns out gay, since that's probably not gonna work. Also, remember when I said biological kids of homosexual people were more likely to be homosexual? Well, that's not the case for kids adopted by homosexual parents. So again, having them raised by LGBTQ people is probably not gonna work either. Neither is any specific personality characteristic or aspect of rearing related to causing homosexuality. Matter of fact, absolutely none of the possible environmental influences that may cause homosexuality seem to be on the social side, so don't even bother with that. So how long does it take to get results? When can you know you succeeded in making your kid gay? As I said, gay people are pretty rare. In most societies, they usually comprise around the 2 to 4% of the male population. However, the percentage of the population that identifies as LGBTQ has been increasing with time and drastically increasing with each generation. What's funny is that we don't actually know the reason for this, and there might be a multitude of explanations for this phenomena, which is an incredibly interesting topic that probably deserves a spot for the next video on the channel. Let me know if you guys are interested in that in the comments below. Anyways, the way things are going, if you have a kid in Gen Z, the chances of them being gay or lesbian are about 5%, with this number probably being on the rise for future generations. So maybe don't get your hopes up. Even if you do everything right, which is really just 2 things, most likely, at best, you won't increase the probability significantly. Now, how can you tell if you manage to make your son belong to the small percentage of the population that is gay? First, one of the strongest predictors for homosexuality in men is childhood gender nonconformity, or the expression of typical behavior of the opposite gender. Citing Bailey 2016, childhood gender nonconformity comprises the following phenomena among boys: cross-dressing, desiring to have long hair, playing with dolls, disliking competitive sports and rough play, preferring girls as playmates, exhibiting elevated separation anxiety, and desiring to be, or believing that one is, a girl. Children are usually considered to be gender nonconforming only if they persistently engage in a variety of these behaviors, as opposed to engaging in a single behavior once or twice. This conclusion comes from 2 types of studies: retrospective and prospective. In retrospective studies, adults are asked about their childhood behavior. These studies rely on childhood memories, so this might be distorted in a way that supports stereotypes about gay and straight people. And in prospective studies, extremely gender nonconforming children are attracted to adulthood to assess their sexual orientations, which can unfortunately be biased by focusing only on highly unusual children. So this isn't the strongest type of evidence. Nonetheless, the 2 kinds of studies highly coincide with one another. So maybe start looking out for this kind of behavior on your your kid. Anyways, you're gonna wanna wait until puberty or just before it so that your kid starts showing signs of sexual or romantic attraction towards other men. Keep in mind, it's possible for people to suppress, hide, or be unaware, ashamed, or confused of their sexual orientations. So even if your kid doesn't express same-sex attraction, don't lose your hope. This doesn't necessarily mean that he's not gay. Matter of fact, a 2021 meta-analysis concluded on the following average age for each milestone of LGBTQ people. Average age for attraction was 12.7 years. Questioning one's orientation was 13.2. Self-identifying was 17.8 years. First sexual activity was at 18.1 years. Coming out was at 19.6. And finally, romantic relationships happened first at 20.9. All of this is on average, of course. Also, if you really want to know if your kid is gay or not, don't even bother with testosterone. Contrary to popular belief, gay men do not exhibit any lower nor higher levels of testosterone as straight men, so getting him checked won't really tell you anything. However, you might want to look at his hands. So if you look at your own hands right now, you'll probably notice that if you're a man, your ring finger is most likely gonna be much longer than your index finger. But if you're a girl, this ratio is gonna be the opposite, with usually a longer or just as long index finger as your ring finger. These differences are explained by prenatal testosterone levels in the mother's womb. More testosterone makes your index finger shorter in relation to your ring finger, and less testosterone does the opposite, hence the difference. Yeah, it's kinda random. So the extensive reviews would usually conclude that gay men and straight men would not have any different ratios, suggesting that prenatal testosterone levels weren't any different for gay or straight men. But after I wrote and edited most of this video, I came across this 2024 meta-analysis that, after a trim and fail, concluded that gay men do indeed have higher or more feminine 2D to 4D ratios as straight men, which actually goes in line with the old discarded theories. Therefore, if you want your kid to be gay, and especially if you want your daughter to be lesbian, maybe take a look at their hands. A longer index finger on a boy or a shorter one on a girl, in proportion to their ring fingers, might be related to them being homosexual. Also, if you really want to know if your kid is gay or not, you might just want to look at his face. There actually happens to be a chunk of evidence out there analyzing the gay face. Now, supposedly, people can tell if someone is gay or not by just briefly looking at their faces, and they can do so with an accuracy of 50 to 70-ish% in the studies. There's even a 2018 paper that got an AI model to clock gay faces with a 91% accuracy, which, for someone with a non-existent gaydar, honestly sounds kinda sus. Again, this research has the same problem as the gay voice studies. Gay people usually comprise around the 3% of the population, but in the majority of these studies, half of the faces that they show participants belong to gay men, and the other half to straight men. So it's way more likely that the accuracy with which people clock gay faces is closer to 50%. If you wanted to make a more realistic study design, you would get a sample of pictures of men, where just like in real life, only 3% of the faces are gay, and then see what accuracy people have in noticing these gay faces. I'd be surprised if a study like that managed to get anything above 10% accuracy. Also, in the studies where they measure physical features, they don't 100% agree on the specific measures that make a face gay, but it seems to suggest a more feminine facial structure, which kinda doesn't make much sense because we already know homosexuality in men is not related to either prenatal or developmental testosterone. So I'm gonna keep it a buck with y'all. I don't really know how we should look at this research. So what can we take from this whole thing? If you want, for whatever strange reason, to have a male gay son, your best bet is for homosexuality to run in you and the mother of your kids' genes, have the highest number of kids possible, and not care about pretty much anything else at all. So, if you haven't noticed by now, this very goofy video concept was just a fun little twist on the original idea of making a video about the biological or environmental causes for sexual orientation. I really hope I don't get torn apart in the comments by people who just read the title and got triggered. I also don't hope I sounded disrespectful, rage baiting, or promoting stereotypization or anything like that. Let me know if I did in the comments. As always, sources in the description, and thanks for watching.